Hey everybody, it's PJ from Karma Airguns, and today we're going to be talking about tuning on the Karma Airguns SLS. This is the standard length version, and we're going to talk about how it gets tuned. There are two principal ways that you tune on the SLS. One is, and that's where we're going to start, it's the more basic method, and that is by decreasing the size of the transfer port, basically allowing less air to get from the tank, the plenum, through the valve, actually to the barrel. And that can be done to make quick adjustments where you have really consistent velocity, but you want to bring it down. The other way is to work the hammer spring and regulator pressure to achieve a desired result. And in some cases, you might find yourself doing both. So let's get right to it. A couple of tools that you're going to need for any airgun tuning process. And that first is going to be a chronograph. I'm using the FX True Ballistic chronograph today. You can use pretty much any chronograph that will read the values you need. There are some that are skewed really low, some that are skewed really high. We're going to be in that 800 to 1100 range for most of our airgun needs. So you need to make sure your chronograph is up to the task. You're also going to need whatever wrenches are required for your gun. And in our case today, it's a 5mm Allen. You're also going to need pellets, whatever pellet you intend to shoot, and air. So today I'm tethered, and it's nice if you can be tethered. Tuning uses a lot of air sometimes, and being able to have yourself constantly connected to an air source means fewer trips over to the compressor, and it just makes the whole thing a lot easier. So I'm going to do this tuning while I'm tethered. Now I need to take and sort of establish what the gun is shooting at base. I've almost kind of like spun the wheel on this gun. I've been tuning it up, tuning it down. This is one of our test guns, so this one's been all over the place on purpose. But I'm just going to take a few shots to see where I am right now before I get the process started. I have 22 caliber JSB Hades in the gun right now. Those are 15 grain pellets. So let's get a velocity reading. So those are right around 994, pretty consistent, but not really where I want to be for this pellet. It's a little bit fast. So I have the regulator pressure down to about 1800 PSI, and that for good function on the semi-auto is about as low as I want to go. I know I can go down a little bit further, but there is a point where if you get too low on the reg, you'll see inconsistent function of the semi-auto. So I don't want to go any lower on the regulator pressure. On my hammer spring, which is right back here, I am pretty far down on that. And in fact, yesterday afternoon, I walked it up to get this really nice plateau, so the velocity is very consistent. What I'm going to do is use the transfer port adjuster to bring that velocity down. So it starts on the left side of the gun. You see a knob, and it's got arrows. The arrows are pointing towards tight, so I'm going to go counter to that, just loosen that a little bit, and then on the other side, I've got a lever or knob that goes from max to minimum. And what I'm going to do is turn it about halfway. I'm going to turn about halfway and see what happens to the velocity. $947, $943, still consistent, but still higher than where I want it. So I'm going to loosen this again, and I'm going to go another little bit there. .844. Still really consistent, but a little lower than I want it to be. So I'm going to loosen it, bring it back a little bit, and reload the magazine. Loading the magazine is very straightforward if you've used a magazine of this type before. If you haven't, you rotate the cover counterclockwise. You're going to feel some spring tension. Flip it over and hold the cover in place like that. And then the first pellet goes in skirt first. Once that's in, you can release the cover because it's going to be held in place. And then the rest of the pellets drop in head first as you rotate the cover around to the closed position. The nice thing about this particular design is if you accidentally, or in this case on purpose, drop one in skirt first, you can always just take the one out and continue with the process. The magazine slots into the gun from the left side to the right, and this cutout corresponds to a bar and keeps everything nice and stable. Magazine reloaded, and I have made another adjustment. 881. .889. This is looking pretty good. 888. So just below 890 on an average. This is exactly where I want to be for this particular pellet. So what I would do now, make sure it's topped off. I would close off the tank, and then I'd run a full shot string to see how many mags I get, what's the efficiency like. Then I'm going to move farther off my backstop, and I'm going to shoot it for accuracy to confirm that everything is happening exactly the way I want. But that's how you use the transfer port in order to bring velocity down where it's consistent, but otherwise a little bit high. So now we're going to transition into tuning the gun up for a heavier pellet. So I have a magazine loaded with AEA 25 grain pellets, so still in 22 caliber. So I'm going to switch this over, and we'll get a velocity reading where we stand now. 749, just what I expected. So I knew that wasn't going to do it, so I'm going to turn the transfer port back to all the way open. We'll see what kind of a difference this makes. 823, so a major jump there, but we're still not where I want to be with these pellets. I want to get these, they're the longer versions of the Diablo shape, so they're good at flying a little bit faster. So I want to get this number up. So what I'm going to do now is start working the hammer spring up to see how high I can go with this regulator pressure. We're always working this balance between hammer spring tension and regulator pressure. My regulator, like I said before, is set at about 1800 PSI. So I'm going to start slowly turning up the hammer spring so that I can see at what point I start losing velocity. If you have too much hammer spring for a given regulator pressure, you get this kind of counterintuitive, what's the word, phenomenon. When you go past the point of just all that hammer can give you at that pressure, we see a drop in velocity. That's why it's so important to have a chronograph, because if you just think turning that hammer spring up to max is going to give you maximum speed, That's not exactly how it works. So if you're new to this tuning bit, this is important for you to pay attention to. You can't really tune without a chronograph because it's not a simple function of picking a regulator pressure that sounds good to you or that somebody else says is good to them and just continuously turning the hammer spring up thinking you're going to get more pressure. There has to be a balance. So in order to change the hammer spring, you open the folding stock and you'll see when you look in there, I need my reading glasses to see it because it's small. So you're going to use a 5mm Allen key. And when you look inside here, you're going to see that there's an arrow clockwise with a minus and an arrow counterclockwise with a plus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a full turn up, and a full turn is 12 clicks. And I'm going to take 2 shots and I'm going to see what that velocity looks like. So that was 838, so a little bit of an increase. And based on how much I went up on the hammer spring, I actually would have expected to see more than that. So I'm going to do one more turn as soon as I reload this magazine, and we're going to see if that's right. If I'm starting to go down or staying the same, I know if I want to get towards 900 feet per second, I need to increase regulator pressure. One thing you need to pay attention to while you're tuning, you cannot or should not change the hammer spring tension while the rifle is cocked. That has to be done while the rifle is decocked. So if you are doing a magazine change and then going to change the hammer spring, what you have to remember is once you take the magazine out, that cocks the rifle. You need to fire off a blank shot in a safe direction into a backstop, then make your hammer spring adjustment, then reload the airgun. If you make those adjustments while the rifle's cocked, you can damage the rifle, and that's not how we say do it, so it unfortunately voids the warranty. So don't be afraid to make hammer spring adjustments, just make sure that you do it while the rifle is decocked. So I've adjusted that up. I know I was at, an 820. So I did go up just a little bit there. May be able to get just a little bit more out of this. Nope, I am absolutely plateaued. So I know now that this is all I've got in terms of being able to maximize the velocity out of this regulator setting. So it's time to turn the regulator up. In order to do that, I'm going to disconnect the tank, remove the line. I'm going to bring you a little bit closer so we can take a peek at these gauges. All right, so we're going to adjust the regulator. One of the great things about this is the clear, big, this way is up, right? So counterclockwise is increasing regulator pressure, and it is perfectly safe to do that while the gun is under pressure. If you want to take the regulator pressure down, the safest way to do that is degas the gun, turn the regulator down, and then build it back up. It is possible, if you are willing to make very small adjustments, to turn the regulator down under pressure. But when you do that, we're talking about going down less than 1/8 of a turn. So not a quarter turn, less than 1/8. And after you make an adjustment, you need to fire several times without pellets into a safe backstop to let the regulator settle into its new spot. Now your regulator gauge is over here, your tank pressure gauge is over here. If your tank pressure drops below regulator pressure, weird things are going to happen, like it's not going to work the way you expect it to. So this should always be higher than this. In our case, and you're going to see that very small changes make a difference, but we're going to turn this pressure up. So I have my 5mm wrench in, and I'm going to be watching this gauge. And I'm trying to take this to about 21 or 2200 PSI. That little movement moved it about 100 PSI. Now, I've moved it. I'm going to move the gun out of frame. You're going to hear it shoot. I'm going to take a couple of shots. And we're going to go up just a little bit higher. All right. Again, I'm going to take a couple of shots to let that regulator settle. And I'm going to give it just a little bit more. So I have adjusted the regulator to just under 2100 PSI. I've got the hammer spring set pretty much down at the minimum. I think I went all the way down and then back up like 3 clicks. I shot a 10-shot string. I'm going to put this up on the camera here. I'll have them edited in. But it was 10 shots, under 9 feet per second variation. It's right around the mid 860s to 870, I think. Let me just look. Yeah, average of 862. Really, actually, a great spot for this gun. And if it were mine, I was setting up for hunting, probably about where I'd leave it. But the purpose of the video is to go through the tuning process, so we're actually going to take it up a little bit. Because I've had a little bit of a break, just because of things I was doing around the shop. I have made sure that the rifle is not cocked, because remember, we don't want to adjust the hammer spring while the rifle's cocked. It puts too much stress and strain on the internal mechanism and will cause some problems for you. So I'm going to go ahead and walk this hammer spring up by a full rotation. That's 12 clicks. Make sure the chronograph is ready to go. And then I'm going to test the velocity. So that's 872. We're up into the 880s. These are high 880s. All right, what's happened now, I went on that last one, I actually dropped 11 feet per second. So what that tells me is that high 880s at this reg pressure on this gun, that's the maximum velocity, because as I build up hammer spring tension, the velocity increases, and when it drops off, that's the point. Sometimes people call it the knee of the curve, but that's the point where you have to pay attention to what you're doing. And what you want to do for a balanced tune on a regulated air gun is bring it back so you're just off the knee of the curve, just a little bit on the too much hammer spring side, a very little bit. So what I would do now is shoot a 10-shot string. Well, because it's a 12-shot magazine, I'd probably shoot a 12-shot string. But I would look at that velocity, and what I'm looking for at that point, if this is enough velocity, if I want to go to 890, I'm going to have to increase the regulator pressure a little bit more and then continue to walk that hammer spring forward. So I'm going to get to that spot, and I'm going to look at consistency. If it's a little bit, let's talk about spreads for a minute. If I have a spread under 10 feet per second for a full magazine, I'm ecstatic about that. That's where I want to be. Sometimes you get an air gun and you come across a tune where it's, 4 or 5, and that's outstanding. But Under 10, I'm really excited. Under 15, that's pretty consistent, realistically. I think a lot of us, strive, and if you get one that's 4 feet per second, you're posting about it on Instagram. Realistically, 15 is a really solid maximum spread for a whole magazine. Even out to 50 yards, if your spread is 25 and under, you're probably not going to see a difference in point of impact shoot, or point of impact, at least in a hunting situation. So if I'm getting, like I'm getting now, 10 to 12, I'm feeling really good about that. And that's probably, if I'm at the velocity I want, where I'm going to stop. On this rifle, if I wanted to go above 900, I know right now I need to increase the regulator pressure, probably another 100 PSI, back off a little bit on the hammer spring, and then go back to that process of walking the hammer spring up, taking a couple of shots, seeing what's happening on the chronograph. I want to build till I get the point where it starts, I go a few more clicks and it starts to drop off, and I'm just going to scale back on that. And then I'm going to look for what spot on that hammer spring adjuster gives me the best shot string. And sometimes 1 or 2 clicks can make the difference. So if you've got the tools, you've got the air gun, you've got the pellets, you've got the air, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take this information and move forward and fine-tune your air gun to meet your particular shooting needs. We do have specs on the website on what we put together through DonnyFL as the base tune. So if you're looking at the Karma website and you're seeing the performance numbers, those are what we've put together here in Florida at, I think we're at 60 feet above sea level. It's relatively humid here most of the time, and a good chunk of the year it's pretty hot. So depending on where you are, what that elevation is, what your humidity levels are, you may see velocities slightly different from what we set as the base tune. But this information should put you in a good position to get good shot strings out of your gun. If you have questions relative to what we're talking about here, the SLS generally, please make sure you put them in the comments so we can get that information out to you as quickly as possible. And until the next video, everybody, shoot safe, shoot straight, and we'll see you around.